a.m. in New York City. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. First phase agreed. Israel and Hamas reach a deal to release all hostages in Gaza. Trade tensions. China unveils new curbs on its rare earth exports ahead of a Trump-Xi meeting. And the US approves billions of dollars worth of Nvidia chip sales to the UAE under a bilateral agreement. Let's have a look at where the markets are looking just a few hours before the open. So I think still deciding where they're going to open. We have fractionally lower futures for the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq 100. But don't forget, yesterday we were up 0.6% on the S&P, twice that on the Nasdaq. And if you took just the stocks alone, it was up 3.4%. So more than almost double making up what it had lost the previous day. The stocks is up 38% this year, and that's one of the reasons why there's a little bit of tension. Again, we do look to be pointed lower today. Let's take a look at yields, because after those Fed minutes yesterday, traders may be just a little bit less convinced of 2 rate cuts this year, just at the margin pricing out 2, but very much at the margin. We're still holding those levels. We're up a basis point to 472, for example, on the 30-year. We also had a demand that proved to be a little middling for a 10-year auction yesterday. That 10-year yield up to 413.26. And elsewhere, the yen was trading above 153 earlier today. It's back below that level now. The euro trading at around 116 and a very little bit of change there. Let's get across now to London and get some individual movers. Here's Valerie Teitel. Val.
Good morning, Ivani. Let's start with a check on these rare earth miners. We are seeing U.S.-listed rare earth miners in the green so far this morning. U.S. rare earths, critical metals, and trilogy metals all adding around 5%. This comes after, as you mentioned, China has announced further export restrictions on their own exports of rare earths, so boosting those miners domestically located in North America. Let's move on to TSMC. As you know, the largest chip manufacturer based out of Taiwan. We did get some sales figures for the update for the previous month. They did surprise on the upside, so beat the analyst estimate. We're seeing shares of TSMC down 0.6%. We will get full results from TSMC next Thursday. Remember, they are the main chip manufacturer for the likes of Nvidia, Broadcom, and AMD. So a lot of attention on those results next week. But while we're speaking about results, let's mention Costco. They had some sales figures out. Analysts calling them impressive, an 8% rise in comparable sales year on year, leading Costco to jump nearly 1.5% in pre-market trade. Bonnie, we still do have some more earnings releases to watch out for. We have PepsiCo and Delta Airlines reporting before the bell. Bonnie?
Valerie, thank you so much. That's Valerie Teitel there. And later in the show, we're going to look at the stock market with Nadia Grant of BNP Paribas. But first, Israel and Hamas reaching a deal to release all hostages in Gaza.
The whole world came together, to be honest. So many countries that you wouldn't have even thought of it, they came together. The world has come together around this deal. You know, having the ability to deal with trade, having the ability to use tariffs to help me make a point. The tariffs have brought peace to the world.
For more, I'm joined by Bloomberg Horizons anchor Jumana Bersechi in Dubai. So, Jumana, the first phase agreed to. Can you give us the details and also what it means now for Hamas's bargaining power if the hostage question is out of the way?
Yeah, absolutely. Both very valid questions, Vonnie. I will say that, as is customary for President Trump, he did announce it on Truth Social in the middle of the night over here, saying that both Israel and Hamas had agreed to phase 1 of his Gaza peace deal, which would secure the release of hostages. There are 20 hostages thought to still be alive, alongside 28 who did die in captivity. That would be in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Also adding that the IDF had agreed to withdraw to predetermined lines. And that was followed up later by confirmation from all parties involved, including Israel, Hamas, and the mediators, Qatar, confirming that phase 1 had been signed on to by all of those parties. The IDF saying a short while ago as well that they had started the implementation of withdrawing to that pre-agreed line. The expectation is that the ceasefire should come into effect around 12 p.m. Local time, after which the vote will be taken to the Israeli cabinet later this afternoon. It will be voted on. The expectation is that it will pass. And then there's a 24-hour period in which Hamas will start preparing the hostages for that release. So President Trump, in a Fox News interview overnight, suggested that the hostages could be released as soon as Monday, though, of course, if there is a window to do it sooner, then that could happen as soon as Sunday. So yes, there is a massive breakthrough this morning diplomatically, but a lot of unanswered questions, as you were saying, Vonnie. Questions about the full disarmament of Hamas, which is something that Israel has been pushing for, future governance of Gaza, rebuilding of Gaza, what exactly that apolitical Palestinian committee and the the board of peace overseeing that Palestinian committee, what that exactly is going to constitute, in addition to the role of the international community in reconstruction efforts. Plus, the final point, of course, is the extent of the IDF withdrawal from Gaza. Currently, they occupy about 70%. To what point, to what line, to what buffer are the IDF content to withdraw in the absence of clarity on Hamas disarmament? So still a lot of questions, but it is a day of celebration for many over here in the region, and hopefully the end to a devastating war.
Jumana, just briefly, what will Hamas want to change in this 20-point plan that pertains to its members, and will it get the opportunity to negotiate on that?
Hamas doesn't have leverage anymore, and I think that's become apparent because of the extent of pressure that has been applied on Hamas by President Trump. He had threatened them with total elimination if their response to the 20-point peace plan was not forthcoming last week. And you also need to remember that this 20-point peace plan was constructed alongside Arab states. It happened alongside the UN General Assembly after the meeting that President Trump had with some of the key leaders from the region. Even yesterday in the announcement, he credited Egypt, Qatar, and Turkey for getting the deal across the line. So we are at a new point now, Vonnie, where Hamas are under a lot of pressure. They don't have as much leverage. And of course, President Trump is keen to get this across the line and to call it a victory, and hopefully one that will lead to sustained peace, as he's been talking about.
Jumana, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Jumana Bersetchi in Dubai. Well, another chip deal overnight. The U.S. has cleared the way for Nvidia to export billions of dollars worth of advanced AI chips to the United Arab Emirates. For more, we're joined now by Bloomberg Intelligence senior tech analyst Matt Bloxham. Matt, give us the details here. We knew this was in the works. What exactly does it mean for, the United Arab Emirates and its AI push?
Yeah, that's right, Vonnie. It's the first step in that big deal that was announced back in May, which will see up to 500,000 Nvidia or other chips go to the UAE over a number of years, in exchange for up to $1.4 trillion of investment from the UAE back into the US. Now, it's not clear yet how these particular Nvidia chips will be used, but obviously the kind of showpiece investment, if you like, into the UAE is this G42 and OpenAI backed 5 gigawatt data center. Now, we understand these chips aren't going to be used for that, but clearly that's the centerpiece. And so I think it's good to see this deal actually start to come to fruition. And I'm sure this is the first of many similar sales to come in the coming months and years. And maybe it'll extend beyond Nvidia and include others like AMD at some point in the near future.
And we don't know, as I understand it, what the reciprocal amount of investment in America that the UAE is going to make as a sort of a thank you for that. I do want to stay on chips, though, but move to TSMC because it beat estimates wildly when it reported third quarter sales. What did we learn from the results?
Yeah, that's right. So about a 3% beat against analyst expectations for the Q3 in total, and the revenue growth, around 31% year on year. Year to date, they're growing at about 36%. So tracking ahead of the 30% guidance for the full year. We only got the revenue number today. The full results will come on October 16th, so next Thursday. So we'll have to wait to kind of hear more of the commentary and what they guide for the kind of the next quarter and perhaps 2026. But it's clearly kind of reassuring that the numbers we're seeing out of Nvidia and AMD and the strong demand we're seeing for OpenAI chips is actually coming through the supply chain to TSMC, which is clearly the dominant provider of advanced chips to the AI market. So yeah, encouraging, but I think people will be waiting really for next week's full results to hear the commentary from management about the forward outlook and whether that's being improved versus the current expectations.
Matt, thank you so much. That is Matt Bloxham there of Bloomberg Intelligence. Over to France now, and President Emmanuel Macron has said he'll name a new prime minister by Friday evening. Let's go straight to Bloomberg's Caroline Conan in Paris for more. So, Caroline, is there optimism that France now can find some stability under the next prime minister?
What a week in French politics, Vernie. I mean, on Monday, we had Sébastien Lecornu resigning just 14 hours after naming his cabinet. Now, he said last night on television that there was a possibility for compromise, even though he's not going to stay on board. But President Macron may have one last chance at naming another prime minister before Friday evening. So we have to hold our breath again for another 36 hours. This time, of course, the only option that seems to be left is a center-left socialist prime minister, someone who may be able to have some sort of non-aggression pact from the Republicans, the center-right, who have already decided to leave the boat on Monday. Clearly, the heart of the issue could be the pension reform. Elisabeth Borne, former prime minister, said over the past couple of days that perhaps a suspension of this pension reform would be a prerequisite in order to find some sort of compromise and pass a budget. But the Republicans have said this is out of the question. So as you can see, we're clearly not out of the woods quite yet. Parliament in France is still divided into 3 blocks. So there is no indication that this 6th prime minister in 2 years in France will last any longer than his predecessor.
And Caroline, what about Macron himself? How fragile is his grip on the presidency after all of this?
It is very fragile. The latest poll we had actually showed his popularity falling at 14%, the lowest since he was first elected back in 2017. So clearly, even within his own camp, many have been distancing themselves from the president. We had Gabriel Attal, the head of the Renaissance, his own party in parliament, saying a few days ago he didn't understand Macron's decisions anymore. Then we had another former prime minister, Edouard Philippe, saying that perhaps we should just pass a budget before the end of the year, and then Macron should call for early presidential elections. At the moment, these presidential elections are planned for middle of 2027. Edouard Philippe saying we cannot have another 18 months of this. So we'll see how this weekend unfolds with this possible new prime minister by Friday evening. But clearly, President Macron is more and more isolated, including within his own camp.
Caroline, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Caroline Conan in Paris. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. China has unveiled new curbs on its rare earth exports, citing national security grounds. It will now require overseas exports to get an export license. The move comes ahead of a high-stakes meeting this month between President Trump and President Xi. A First Brands creditor is pushing for an investigation into how $2.3 billion disappeared. BlackRock and others are weighing withdrawals from a Jefferies fund tied to the auto part maker's debt. Comedian Jimmy Kimmel thought his late-night show was over after ABC suspended the program following comments he made over the assassination of Charlie Kirk. He spoke at the Bloomberg Screen Time event in Los Angeles.
The important thing to me was that I was able to explain what I was saying, what I was trying to say.
Because you felt like your initial comments had been mischaracterized.
I didn't feel like it was.
They were.
It was intentionally and I think maliciously mischaracterized, yes.
Yeah.
And coming up, we'll bring you our conversation with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, as we enter day 9 of the shutdown. That's next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Vonnie Quinn in New York. The shutdown impasse dragging into a 9th day now. Bloomberg's Joe Matthews spoke to Speaker of the House Mike Johnson on the main negotiating issue.
It's political games being played by Democrats in the Senate. There is one reason and one reason alone that they've all just magically changed their tune. I mean, they've done a 180-degree turn from what they have always said and done emphatically in keeping the government open. They said as recently as March of this year, we're playing the highlight reel tape outside the Speaker's office right now. They all said in their own words, you can't shut the government down. It's too painful. Something changed. What changed was the political calculation. Chuck Schumer is worried about, as was just said, an attack or a challenge from his left flank. He's afraid that the Marxist wave in New York is going to take him over as well because he represents that state. And so he's got to pick a fight with Trump and show that he's fighting. Well, they picked a fight that has nothing to do with stopgap funding. They're talking about the Obamacare subsidies, for example. That's a December 31 policy issue. We were always going to negotiate that and debate it and deliberate over it in October, November. That always has been on the schedule, and they know that, but they're trying to pretend that's the issue of the day. It's not. It's a red herring. It's a distraction. They're not doing their jobs, and real Americans are getting hurt.
Well, we spoke just a few moments ago with Congresswoman Catherine Clark, who said, we just want a gesture, Mr. Speaker. Would you consider a promise to bring that negotiated legislation to a floor vote, up or down? We'll make sure that happens before the end of the year.
The Speaker of the House is in no position to project forward what the outcome of a big policy debate is going to be. That'd be unprecedented for anyone to do that, and I won't. What we have told them is the obvious fact that there are ongoing negotiations and discussions going on today between Republicans and Democrats, and certainly within our own caucuses, about how some of that would need to be reformed. Look, there's a lot of conservatives who have real problems with the Obamacare subsidy, okay? When the government subsidizes something, it means it's not working. It's like the EV mandates, you know? People didn't want to buy electric vehicles. The government said, we'll give you $7,500 cash if you do, and they still didn't buy enough of them, right? When the government subsidizes something, it means the market's not working. Obamacare was supposed to bring down the cost of health care. Premiums have skyrocketed since it was created in 2010. They're up like 60%. So something's not working. There's real reforms that are needed. But it's a complex issue that takes a lot of time for members on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers to negotiate. They're trying to short-circuit all that right now. That's not how this process works. The Clean CR is so simple, Joe. It's 24 pages in length. It has exactly 0 Republican policy writers on it. We've made it so simple. We just said, do what you've always done. Let's keep the lights on and keep the appropriations and the negotiation process going. They refuse to do it because, again, they want to show a fight because they can't stand President Trump. That's what this is. And in the meantime, American people are being used as pawns in this game, and it is so frustrating to us.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson there speaking on Bloomberg's balance of power. Let's take a look at markets now, because we have futures pretty much deciding what to do today after an up day yesterday. The S&P was up 0.6% yesterday, the Nasdaq 100 up 1.2%. As you can see, the US dollar index pretty much unchanged. We do have a weaker yen once again today. We were above 153 earlier, now trading at 152.75. The euro trading at 116.17. And the 10-year yield, after middling demand at that auction yesterday, trading at 413.06, up about a basis point. A little bit of relief in Japan, where yields have come down about 10 basis points. Coming up, the Gaza peace deal headlining major newspapers, plus more in your front page news next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Time now for your front page news. First up on the front pages of major newspapers, Israel and Hamas reaching a deal to free all the hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. The talks were brokered by the US, Egypt, Qatar and Turkey, based on a plan unveiled by President Trump last week. Trump told Fox News the captives will probably be released on Monday. Next up, the Wall Street Journal reporting that the Trump administration said it isn't planning to impose tariffs on generic drugs from foreign countries. The administration has been weighing duties on a range of products and ingredients in a national security tariff investigation. The move, though, isn't final, could change in the coming weeks. And the Washington Post is reporting that the Pentagon has investigated nearly 300 Defense Department employees for online comments on the death of Charlie Kirk. The inquiry follows a directive by the department's political leadership to silence criticism of Kirk, who was a fervent supporter of President Trump. According to the Post, Hegset's order to target those critical of Kirk reflects a deepening alarm over the former Fox News personality's stewardship of the military. All right, let's move on to these markets now, because we've had a couple of days where things have been a little choppy, let's put it that way. We had obviously the semiconductors down 2% the session before yesterday's, and then they roared back up 3.4% for the stocks yesterday. So what will today bring? It's hard to say. We do have futures pointed lower, but very fractionally lower, and it is early going. The S&P rose 0.6% yesterday, don't forget. The Nasdaq 100 rose 1.2% yesterday, so maybe taking a little breather. We do have the VIX back below 16.5. It rose above 17 for most of the session the day before yesterday. Let's take a look at some other asset classes to keep an eye on, because we obviously have the dollar index with a little weight to it. Once again today, we're seeing the yen trading weaker. It was above 153 a few hours ago. It's back below that level now, back at 152 and change. The euro, though, also weaker, trading at 116.16 or thereabouts. We have gold staying above 4,000. We got very close to the 4,000 mark today. It was down, but as you can see, it's coming right back up to flat. And Bitcoin taking another turn, although Bitcoin has been pretty volatile over the last few days. Well, coming up, Nadia of BNP Paribas joins us as she sees a great setup for equities into next year. This is Bloomberg. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. First phase agreed. Israel and Hamas reach a deal to release all hostages in Gaza. Trade tensions. China unveils new curbs on its rare earth exports ahead of a Trump-Xi meeting. And the U.S. approves billions of dollars worth of Nvidia chip sales to the UAE under a bilateral agreement. Let's get a quick check on markets. We are seeing futures pointed very, very fractionally lower after rip-roaring comeback yesterday for chips stocks. The stocks is up 38% for the year now and was up 3.4% in yesterday's session. Let's move to yields, because we didn't see too much movement. We saw middling demand for a 10-year auction yesterday that has the 10-year yield up to 4.13 and change. In Japan, a little bit of relief, yields down about 10 basis points there, but we do still have a weaker yen, and we're keeping an eye on gold as well, still above $4,000 an ounce. Let's get to some individual movers now. Over to London and Valerie Titel. Valerie.
Good morning, Ivani. Let's start with a check on U.S. rare earth miners, because they are headed higher in the pre-market trade and have headed higher since we checked on them 30 minutes ago. But USA rare earths up 8.5%, critical metals up over 7%, and trilogy metals up nearly 7% in pre-market trade. This comes after, as you mentioned, China clamps down on some exports of rare earths, asking these exporters to get export licenses to do so. So that's boosted some of these North American miners' names. Let's move over to the tech space with the Taiwanese chip manufacturer TSMC out with sales figures for the previous month that did surpass analysts' expectations. But nonetheless, we're seeing shares of TSMC retrace in pre-market, down 0.4%. Remember, TSMC is the main chip supplier to the likes of Nvidia, Broadcom, and AMD. They will release their full results next Thursday. Perhaps analysts are waiting for that catalyst before adding to any positions. We also got another sales update from the U.S. retailer Costco. This one also looking pretty rosy. Comparable sales rising 8% year on year. Analysts calling it impressive. We're seeing shares of Costco rise just over 1%, 1.3% in pre-market trade. We will have some more corporate updates this morning, Vani. We are expecting third quarter releases from both PepsiCo and Delta Airlines before the bell. Vani?
Yes, indeed. We will be looking forward to those. Valerie, thank you so much. Now, turning back to broader markets, Nadia of BNP Paribas Asset Management saying U.S. activity will pick up next year thanks to looser fiscal and monetary policy. She sees value in being positioned to benefit from themes such as onshoring and defence. Nadia joins us now. She is BNP Paribas Asset Management's head of global equities. Nadia, thank you for joining. It's great to hear that you think the economy is in great shape, but there is a little bit of a ways to go between now and next year. Do you see any concern that maybe the stock market is overvalued and we'll see some pullbacks between now and then?
Hey, pleasure to be with you. We do have a lot of risks to our outlook as usual, and obviously the fact that the market market so far has been pretty much plain sailing through the government shutdown, for example, or the fact that you still have geopolitical tension aplenty. And so absolutely, you're not immune to any correction. However, when we take a step back and we look at sort of a big picture, what we see is we see an economy that has been extremely resilient in the face of a lot of uncertainty this year and in the face of tariff. So tariff did probably impact growth. So growth has been slowing somewhat from the sort of trend growth that we were expecting at the onset of the year. And inflation is a bit perhaps more sticky, but nonetheless, so we've seen activity extremely resilient. Companies have continued to post very strong earnings, in particular in the tech sector, but also in the financial sector. And we think that next year can probably be a year of broadening, and that's in part due to the fact that somewhat offsetting a lot of those tariffs is now the fact that you'll have the benefit from the OBA, from yes. the big beautiful bill. So that will help offset some of that downside. And obviously, you have also loose monetary policy.
Yes.
And so, yeah.
Nadia, how much time is your team putting into potential scenarios under a new Fed chair? What are you looking for next year in terms of cuts?
So we, on the equity side, we usually just look at the consensus. So in terms of our scenario is very much going to be, if you do have the cuts that are in expectation from the consensus, this is a great backdrop for that broadening of the leadership in the S&P 500. And so where we have had only delivery of earnings growth from a couple of stocks over the past few years, and including this year, what we're expecting for next year is that you'll have finally contribution from far more sectors. And what we're reminded of in particular is the fact that you, in effect, had a bit of a manufacturing recession in the US, which is why a lot of the companies that are more exposed to the goods, to the manufacturing sectors, have not delivered earnings growth. And so we think that a loosening of the monetary condition will really play a role in terms of helping the manufacturing.
So Nadia, you say you're positioned for benefiting from artificial intelligence explosion, including China tech. China tech has rallied to, a great degree this year. Where are you positioned in China to continue to benefit from this?
Yeah, it has, but it also it depends on where you start to look at, right? If you look at some of those companies in China, they had really been hammered and they've really been underperforming for the better of the past 3-4 years. So actually, the starting point is a lot more attractive, but it's still, despite the run that you've had year to date, they're still looking pretty cheap when you look at sort of PE multiples. And particularly relative to, say, a U.S. counterpart. Now, they don't grow to the same extent, and they don't have the same quality or returns on equity than the U.S. counterpart would have, but they're nonetheless a very interesting investment proposition if you think that you're having a sort of localization in that AI race, that it was going to be China AI for China and U.S. for pretty much the rest of the world.
Nadia?
So we still find that very attractive.
Can I ask you about France? Is France investable at the moment, at least sovereign bond-wise? I mean, obviously the equity market is one thing, but what do you make of these spreads, OATs to bonds, and whether that will improve any?
Yeah, so on the equity, we're on the equity side. So on the equity side, we look at some of the companies that we have there, where actually they don't have as much exposure to the political situation. When I speak to my colleagues on the bond side, there isn't a clear path for an improvement in the fiscal situation in France for the budget yet. And so until you get clarity on the matter, it's difficult to see big evolution on the spread. So it's the spread is really the manifestation of that lack of visibility on clearing the budget and making progress in reducing the deficit. And so, yes, at the moment, unfortunately, it's very hard to see that gridlock being unlocked. Yeah.
Nadia, you also mentioned novel therapeutics. That's kind of a volatile and potentially dangerous area to get involved in. Can you give us any hints as to where the novel therapeutics space you're looking?
Yes, I mean, there is plenty of innovation. I think the healthcare sector is now trading at multiples that are equivalent to what you would have seen back in the aftermath of the great financial crisis. So it's extremely cheap, and we don't think it's cheap for a good reason, because you do have a lot of innovation, and it's not just GLP-1, the innovation. You have it. You have plenty in the pipeline of companies across therapeutics, across oncology, and that can be large and small companies. So we have a great healthcare team and an expert there, and we basically leverage their insight on the matter. And that includes also looking again at China. China is doing fantastically in terms of they have to deal with their aging demography, and you're having now over half of the trials in the world that are happening from Chinese companies with great investments in the space. So we think this is a great source of alpha.
Nadia, thank you so much. We have to leave it there. That's Nadia Grant of BNP Paribas. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. The US has approved several $1 billion worth of Nvidia chip exports to the UAE. A US official said the approval came after the UAE made concrete plans for a reciprocal amount of investment on American soil. The approval is the initial step in implementing a controversial deal that could serve as a blueprint for American AI statecraft. China has unveiled new curbs on its rare earth exports, citing national security grounds. It will now require overseas exporters to get an export license. The move comes ahead of a high-stakes meeting this month between President Trump and President Xi. President Trump will undergo a physical exam Friday following mounting questions about his health. While the White House describes the visit as his regular yearly physical, the 79-year-old had an annual exam just 6 months ago. Since then, the president has been spotted with swollen ankles and a persistent bruise on his right hand. Coming up, Israel and Hamas agree on the terms to implement the first steps for settling their 2-year war. Details next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. President Trump has announced a deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas to cease the assault on Gaza and release the remaining hostages. Trump spoke to Fox about the deal.
The whole world came together, to be honest. So many countries that you wouldn't have even thought of it. They came together. The world has come together around this deal. You know, having the ability to deal with trade, having the ability to use tariffs to help me make a point. The tariffs have brought peace to the world.
For more, I'm joined now by Bloomberg Horizons anchor Jumana Bersetti in Dubai. So Jumana, can you give us the details?
Yes, so what we know is what Trump posted overnight on Truth Social, which is that the phase 1 of this broader Gaza peace plan has been agreed to by both sides, by Israel and by Hamas. That was followed up by confirmation just a short while afterwards that indeed all parties had signed on to it. It is important to note, though, this is just phase 1 of a broader 20-point plan that was released last week. And in this phase 1, it would entail the release of hostages. It is thought that there are still 20 alive, alongside 28 who died in captivity. That would be alongside an exchange for Palestinian prisoners, thought to be around 2,000 in total. Now, the numbers at this point not clear because later this afternoon at 5 p.m. local time, the Israeli cabinet will be voting on, number one, the deal itself, and two, the implementation of a ceasefire. And in that involves signing off on some of the names of the Palestinian prisoners who are going to be released. So yes, a diplomatic breakthrough on phase one, but still some broader questions remain about Hamas disarmament and the future governance of Gaza.
Jumana, thank you so much. That is Jumana Bersachi there in Dubai. Well, let's stay on this news. We have Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister joining us now, Sharren Haskel. Deputy Foreign Minister, thank you so much for joining. First, can I ask you, is a ceasefire in effect right now?
Yes, it is. I think right now it just went into effect. And we are waiting for the cabinet meeting of the government of Israel to receive the in-depth detail and the fine letters of the discussions that were in the last 2 days. And afterwards, we're really hopeful we'll be able to sign at least the first stage of the peace plan of Trump.
Are you saying we can expect an approval from the cabinet?
I think so. I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has our backing. He's got the majority in the cabinet to pass this deal, but it's very important to discuss in depth. Some of the questions are major, with a lot of hope and excitement for the return of the hostages. Israelis are having a very difficult day as well. It means that hundreds of terrorists, convicted terrorists with blood on their hands who have murdered innocent children and women and men, some of them have participated in the 7th of October massacre, will be released back into society with no restriction. Think about the families of the victims of those terrorist attacks and how they feel today. It's a very difficult day for our society. But with that difficulty, we have made so many concessions to make sure that we choose a diplomatic path to bring back our hostages and to achieve the goal of the war. Anytime we had that path, Israel chose it. We always wanted peace and stability.
No doubt a very difficult day, but will the cabinet agree to the hostage exchange that's on paper right now, including some of the details that you just mentioned?
Well, I do believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu has the majority. It is important to have a discussion because some of those names are vile, monstrous people who committed horrendous crimes that, it's difficult to even talk about.
Have you agreed on the actual list of names of prisoners to be released?
So some have been discussed, particular names, but that will be brought in the cabinet meeting. All the details about more concessions and the discussions and compromise that we still need to make are going to be discussed in the next couple of hours.
Curious as to whether Israel is in contact with Hamas and whether you know where the hostages are and at what point we will start seeing some of the hostages come out of Gaza and back onto Israeli soil.
If this deal will be signed, we expect them, at least the 20 live hostages, to be back already on the weekend in the loving arms of their family. And that would be incredible news. As President Trump put through his plan, it's meant to go through 72 hours for the release of the entire hostages. We hope that will still be the deal. But as I said, the small details and the changes will be addressed and talked in the next couple of hours.
Now, Deputy Foreign Minister, you confirmed a moment ago that the ceasefire is in effect. How long will the bombing be stopped? How long will the ceasefire be in effect? Is it just those 72 hours that you mentioned, or will it take into account further negotiations on other parts of the plan?
Well, President Trump's peace plan is a great plan. And the fact is that the entire international community have agreed to it, including Israel, including the Palestinian Authority. Everybody understands that this peace plan is the path towards peace and stability. Israel said outright, yes, it agreed to President Trump's plan. The Palestinian Authority agreed to it. But unfortunately, Hamas hasn't completely agreed to it now. The first stage is going into effect, and we are hopeful that it will continue to the second stage of that as well. But it's still yet and early to discuss. Hamas wants maybe to make changes, maybe to talk about the small details. But the fact is that we are committed for this discussion. And I think that President Trump and his approach, the pressure that he's been putting on Hamas, has shown results.
Do you know anything about a President Trump visit? Are you expecting him to arrive anytime in the next day or two?
Well, I've heard some of these reports as well. We've heard the reports of his coming. I think he truly deserved to come and be part of the signing of it. He has such a huge part in it.
When do you expect the signing ceremony?
Well, it's still yet to talk about it, but in the next couple of hours after the cabinet meeting, all of the details will be revealed.
You mentioned that Hamas was, there were several questions surrounding Hamas's intentions, and I'm curious if you think Hamas might be ready at this point to put down its weapons.
Well, this is the second part of the peace plan of President Trump. Everybody accepted it. Qatar accepted it. Turkey accepted it. The Palestinian Authority accepted it. There is no role a terrorist organization like Hamas can play, not through civilian power and not through military power. They don't want peace. They don't want stability. They want death and murder. It's written on their charter, the complete obliteration of the state of Israel, murdering all the Jews in Israel and out. Their leadership have declared time and time again in the media that whenever they have the opportunity to commit the atrocities of the 7th of October, the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, they will commit it again and again and again. You cannot have a terrorist organization part of a future of stability and peace. Even the Palestinian Authority has accepted that. And so I really hope, that Qatar and Turkey and President Trump will continue to put pressure on Hamas to accept the second stage as well.
Will Israel be satisfied if the points in the Trump peace plan pertaining to Hamas members are agreed to by Hamas members? Will Israel be satisfied at that point?
Sorry, with what?
With the points pertaining to Hamas members, that they be given, exit, that they go to other countries, that they put down their weapons and so on. Will that be enough to satisfy Israel?
Well, look, the second stage of the peace plan is very outlaid. It's very explained as well. If part of that is an exile of Hamas leadership, it is part of the plan. But we have already said yes to that. We've said yes to that. The Turkish said yes to that. The Jordanian, the Qatari, and the Americans. And so, we are willing, and we have made major concessions throughout the last 2 years to walk through the diplomatic path and not war. Every time we chose a war, it was because we were left with no other choice to bring back our family members home and to dismantle Hamas. We have been through a huge national tragedy, one that any country, reasonable country, sensible country that wants to defend its citizens would have acted exactly the same way.
Yes. Deputy Foreign Minister, we saw scenes in Tel Aviv earlier of people celebrating, and I'm curious just as to what you're feeling. Are people living in Tel Aviv and in broader Israel happy about this agreement, happy that the hostages are coming home, and will they want this ceasefire to be lasting, and will you back them on that?
Well, this is the guidance of the Prime Minister and the government of Israel that have paved the path towards it. I mean, for us, it's a breath of air, finally, after 2 years that we've been battling and fighting to bring our family members back home. Our entire nation is celebrating, feels like maybe soon, just in a few days, we'll be able to start a healing process that we weren't able to even start. We try to keep our expectation low because we've been disappointed in the past as well, because we're dealing with a terrorist organization, with Hamas. But, the entire nation is very joyful. But I have to say that with that, there's a lot of heavy-hearted and very mixed feeling for the release of those murderers and the families of the victims who are going through terrible time, knowing that the people who murdered their loved ones will be released back into society with no restrictions.
Yes, about 2,000 jailed Palestinians is the number that is being reported that you said has been agreed to. Is Israel...
Convicted terrorists, it's important to know. These are convicted terrorists with blood on their hands who committed some of the most horrendous crimes you can ever imagine.
Is the army ready to pull back to at least the first line agreed to?
Yeah, everything that President Trump put in a line, we have accepted. It seems like Hamas have actually tried to push that and to negotiate more. We're willing to make more concession. As I said, Israel have always taken the path through peace and stability and the diplomatic path to gain that.
Deputy Minister, just final question, and briefly, if you would. You've always criticized some Arab countries for not putting enough pressure on Hamas. What made the difference this time around?
I think that the pressure that President Trump put on them as well, and the way that he's been conducting. President Trump has been very effective. He doesn't care about the process, okay? He cares about the end results. And that kind of path have shown and proven to be very effective, whether it was the pressure he put on Hezbollah, on Lebanon, that brought that ceasefire, whether it's with Iran, whether it's with India and Pakistan, or, Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. And here in Israel as well, we can feel that.
Yes.
He understands who the victim and who is the aggressor, and he puts
Deputy
pressure
Foreign Minister,
on the aggressor.
we're out of time, but thank you so much for giving us your time. That is Sharren Haskel on such an auspicious day for the region. This is Bloomberg Brief.